Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. Podcast, and that is that Friday afternoon was Pac-12 Media Day. It was the first time that everyone has gotten together since the bombshell that USC and UCLA were leaving for the Big Ten, and it was the first time that basically anybody spoke publicly about it, certainly in a public setting. First time Lincoln Riley has spoken, first time Chip Kelly has spoken, and oh, by the way, the first time that George Kliavkoff, the Pac-12 commissioner, has spoken. And boy, oh boy, did he have a lot to say. He obviously presented a united front. He obviously said we've never been better, as he should, even if it's not totally true. And he certainly had what I thought was one pretty bombshell comment that I do think a lot of people, I guess I would just say I feel differently about one specific comment than a lot of other people do. But let's get to that comment. And it centers around a few weeks ago, the Big 12 had their media day. And obviously the Big 12 was trying to determine its future post-Texas and Oklahoma. And their new commissioner, Brett Yormark is his name, was asked about the future of the conference, and he basically said, "We are open for business." Well, George Kliavkoff, the Pac-12 commissioner, was asked about that quote on Friday, and here is what he had to say. "With respect to the Big 12 being open for business, I appreciate that. We haven't decided if we're going shopping there yet or not." Oh, my goodness. Slap fight between the Big 12 and the Pac-12. But what I would say is I actually thought it was sort of an important quote, and kind of let me explain why. Because when I saw the quote, I was traveling on Friday, had a buddy's wedding. But when I saw the quote, the reaction that I saw from most of the media covering Pac-12 Media Days, Pac-12 Media Days, was kind of like this whole, oh, he looks desperate, he looks pathetic, he looks sad, blah, 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 blah. I actually didn't perceive it that way at all. And what I would also say is I'll take it a step further. I actually kind of feel differently now about the present and future of the Pac-12 than I have over the last couple weeks. If you listen to this show, I've talked extensively about the future of the Pac-12, how how all the 10 remaining schools are not committing to each other. Nobody wants to commit long term. But the more I think about it, the more I talk about it, the more I talk to people in the industry, and the more I look at certain things that maybe some people aren't talking about, the more that I do wonder if it is possible that this Pac-10 that is now stuck together remains together, rather than these schools branching off and going to the Big 12, these schools branching and going off there, maybe a few falling down to the Mountain West. The more that time goes on, I do wonder if they actually do remain together. And I think there was some stuff that came out of Pac-12 Media Days, and really stuff that has come out over the last couple weeks that has kind of changed my opinion. Not saying something crazy can't happen. Not saying that Arizona, the corner schools, whatever, can't decide to leave the Pac-12 tomorrow for the Big 12. But there are a couple things that have happened that have kind of caught my attention, and some stuff that I've talked to people behind the scenes about that makes me a little bit more thinking that this Pac-12, as it's currently constituted, might stay together. What are those things that I've heard? Well, first of all, and I've said this a million times, but there is some new information that I kind of want to share, and that is that, look, nothing at the highest levels of realignment is going to happen. And when I say highest levels of realignment, that's the SEC and the Big Ten. Nothing is going to happen until Notre Dame makes their decision, right? If Notre Dame decides that they do want to join a conference, then that probably leads to further expansion and further tearing apart of the Pac-12. The problem is that, one, Notre Dame doesn't have to make a decision anytime soon. They can kind of play their cards close to the vest, see what their options are, and make a decision in a year, in 18 months, in 2 years as their current deal with NBC runs out. But what I have been told increasingly is that Notre Dame prefers to stay independent. I don't even think that's like breaking news. And that really what Notre Dame's independence is going to rely on is whether or not an independent like themselves will have access to the future of the college football playoff. So in other words, if you're not in a conference, is that going to hurt your chances to make the college football playoff? Well, there has been some interesting quotes the last few weeks from Media Days that make me believe that Notre Dame is going to be just fine in the next iteration of college football if they are an independent and not in a conference. Here is why. Did you hear what Greg Sankey said at SEC Media Days? The ideas that we had about what, and I'm paraphrasing, but the ideas of what we had about the college football playoff are being torn up and started over again. Again, Greg Sankey wanted 6 auto bids and 6 at-large bids. 6 auto bids for conference champions, 6 teams getting in as at-large. That is going to change, and Kevin Warren essentially said the same thing at Big Ten Media Days the other day, is that the 2 entities that are going to determine the future of the college football playoff more than any, the SEC and the Big Ten, they are both now in favor of more at-large teams than ever before because, let's be honest, it benefits them the most. It'll get the most SEC and Big Ten teams in, and there is such a consolidation of power in those 2 conferences that it only makes sense. So if we have a world where maybe there's only 3 auto bids in a 12-team college football playoff, if we have a world where there are 4, 5 auto bids in a college football playoff, that not only benefits the SEC, not only benefits the Big Ten, it benefits Notre Dame. And so the more that I'm hearing, the more that I think that Notre Dame does remain independent and doesn't go to a conference. Again, it can change. Things change all the time. But I believe that right now, if I had to bet, in 5 years, Notre Dame is still an independent, and they still have easy access to the playoff, and maybe they have better access than they even do now in the current climate. So take Notre Dame off the table. I don't think the Big Ten and the SEC are expanding. Both commissioners have said that. I believe it, which leads me to point number 2. I believe the Big Ten and the SEC are not expanding because of the fact that there is literally no one out there except for Notre Dame and maybe a few teams in the ACC that right now cannot get out of their TV contract that really alters the paradigm of the TV contracts that they currently have. And so why that is interesting to me is because it leads me to the second point that I'm going to make, which is that when you look at the Big 12, Pac-12 element of this, when you look at the idea of the Big 12 stealing from the Pac-12 or the Pac-12 stealing from the Big 12, it seems like obviously the Big 12 has had leverage over the last couple months, or the last month since USC and UCLA have left. But here's the most basic question that I would ask you about a potential Big 12 raid of the Pac-12. The Pac-12 currently doesn't have a TV contract beyond, 2024. Basically, all of their schools are essentially free agents. If the Big 12 was such a great option for all of these schools, why have none of them joined the Big 12? And what it really leads me to believe is that I think the second-tier teams in the Big 12 and the second-tier teams in the Pac-12 are starting to realize they don't really offer all that much to each other. And if I can give you one thing, and I say it on this show all the time, but for some reason there are so many people that are still confused about this. If I can give you one piece of advice when following realignment at the highest levels, again, including the Big Ten, including the SEC, it is this. It is that TV markets, population in areas, do not determine moves in the modern era of college athletics. It is big brands, not big TV markets. I keep hearing this, and it's driving me crazy. Well, if the Big 12, if they add Stanford and Cal, they get the Bay Area, and that's like 2.8 million TV households. And if they add Colorado, they get Boulder and Denver, and that's like 1.8 million households. And Phoenix is a rapidly improving market, and if you get Arizona State, oh my goodness. Except here's the thing. That does not matter in modern realignment. It mattered 15 years ago when everybody was on linear TV. But what matters right now in this era is how big your brand is, how much of a national brand you are, and do you increase somebody else's TV deal? That is why Texas and Oklahoma are in the SEC. Texas, you can love them, you can hate them. They are a national brand. Oklahoma's TV market is non-existent. But they went to the SEC, and the SEC wanted them because they are a huge national brand with an easily identifiable culture and style of play and success and all that. They make sense for the SEC. USC is a national brand in football, even though they've stunk. UCLA is a national athletics brand, even if their football team has not been good. That is why those schools are there. That is why Oregon and Washington and Arizona State, are not in the Big Ten and not in the SEC. They offer nothing to those conferences. And so when you look at the current landscape, I think the Pac-12 schools are starting to realize it's not really going to change all that much for us if we go there. The question becomes, are things more stable there? And that's what I think everybody's trying to figure out. And so, yes, I could still see a scenario where tomorrow, a week from now, a month from now, a couple teams decide to go to the Big 12 because it's a bit more stable. But on the flip side, it is not going to move the needle financially for any of these schools in the way that they think. Again, if anybody was going to make big money for these TV networks, they would already be in the SEC or the Big Ten. Finally, what I would say, and this is important, this is something that I've been thinking about a lot over the last couple weeks, and I think there is something to it, is I actually do think that the Pac-12 is actually in a little bit of a better position with their TV structure than people think for two reasons that nobody's talking about. First of all, to be clear, and I do know, by the way, that I saw the report from my buddy Jason Shear that the Pac-12 was offered $24 million per school in the current contract for ESPN. It was a lowball offer. So I get that the offers on paper do not look good, and if those offers remain, then the Pac-12 will cease to exist. But at the same time, the more that I think about it, there really have been two things that I've seen over the last couple weeks that do make me think that they might be in a little bit of a better position than people realize. One, Kevin Warren did say something very interesting at Big Ten Media Days last week. He mentioned how the Big Ten, now having a West Coast TV presence, opens up another TV window for them. What do I mean? Well, Big Ten, not great at math, but you do some simple math. The westernmost Big Ten school prior to USC and UCLA's arrival was Nebraska. So you can't play games at 10 o'clock Eastern. You can't play games at 10:30 Eastern. You can't play games at 11 Eastern. Well, now the Big Ten can because they have USC and UCLA in their conference. That is a big win for Fox, who we expect to be the primary rights holder for the Big Ten. And it completely changes the paradigm for ESPN. Because right now, I mean, I guess Fox does broadcast games, but why this is actually an important leverage point for the Pac-12, ESPN just doesn't want to punt that 10 o'clock, 10:30 Eastern time window. Live programming trumps everything, and ESPN isn't just going to stop broadcasting games at 10:30 Eastern time. They want those late night games because they do still draw reasonably well. I mean, it's not Michigan, Ohio State well, but they draw reasonably well. And so ESPN needs something to broadcast there. And so I do believe the Pac-12 has a little bit of leverage because ESPN isn't just going to give away that late night window to the Big Ten. They want games of their own. Well, unless you want to sign the Mountain West to some crazy deal, there really is no other option other than going to the Pac-12. And so, yes, I saw Jason's report, and Jason's the man. I love Jason. But I saw the report of $24 million. That's a low ball offer trying to get the Pac-12 to commit to something long term. Two, here's the other thing about why I think the Pac-12 has a little bit of leverage here in terms of TV. It's that they're probably going to be the first major conference, if you want to call them that. And I know there's really only two conferences that really matter in the future of college sports. That's the Big Ten and the SEC. But I think they're the first major conference that I do think could be a player for these streaming services. We all know that Apple TV and Amazon and Google and Hulu and Netflix want to get into live sports broadcasting if they are not already. We know that the NFL Thursday night games are going to be exclusively on Amazon. We do know that MLB is broadcasting Friday night games on Apple. Some of you might have missed this. The MLS signed an exclusive with Apple TV, meaning going forward, I don't know if it's next year or soon, their games will only be broadcast on Apple TV and not on linear TV, not on Fox, FS1, or ESPN. And so when I look at the Pac-12 situation, I do think they have a little bit of a leverage point here because I think they're the first college conference that can take advantage of that situation. Why is that? It is because if you look at the SEC and you look at the Big Ten, I think they're so powerful that they're actually somewhat limited. Now, they're going to get so much money from ESPN, for the SEC and the Big Ten from Fox that it's not going to matter. But those are also conferences, it's going to be tough to sell to your fans that you need to sign any kind of deal with any kind of streaming service. SEC is already locked up. Big Ten should be locked up soon. It's just going to be hard to sell that to your fan base. Go to Ohio State fans and say, hey, oh, by the way, on top of paying all this for your cable bill, now you got to go get Apple Plus or whatever it's called, or Amazon Prime to watch Ohio State versus Penn State on a Saturday. So I don't think the Big Ten can go with the streaming services. The SEC has chosen not to in their latest TV contract with ESPN. But the Pac-12 can. And even if they're only selling their second-tier rights, which is basically the second-tier games, they can make that move. And I think most of their fans would be understanding of that because it's the only way to survival. And so I think the Pac-12, between the late-night window being the only option for ESPN and the fact that they can take advantage of those streaming services, I do think all of a sudden they're maybe in a little bit of a better position than I was even anticipating a couple weeks ago. And so to kind of wrap up, what I would just kind of say, I'm not saying that we can't get news otherwise. I'm not saying that in a week or a month that Arizona State, Utah, Colorado couldn't be members of the Big 12. But I do feel like if something was going to happen, it feels like it would have happened by now. Whether those schools stay together as 10, whether they add a team like San Diego State or Boise, I'm starting to wonder, is the Pac-12 actually in a little bit better position than I think I realized and I think a lot of other people realize right now?